Okay, so I have to admit, when you first handed me this huge stack of files for
Yeah.
today's deep dive, I thought, uh, really? Tupac?
Yeah, people usually think they know the whole story.
Right. I mean, I feel like I know everything there is to know already. The bandana, the hologram, the thug life tattoo across the stomach. It's basically pop culture 101 at this point.
Exactly. He is probably the most scrutinized artist in history.
He is. But then I started actually reading these documents you pulled for us. And to everyone listening, we are not talking about Wikipedia pages here.
Not at all.
We've got actual DEA reports, legal motions, transcripts from investigative YouTube channels like Art of Dialogue and Discretion TV, plus interviews with his mother, Afeni Shakur, and writings from Yasmin Fula.
And excerpts from Blaise on Fire's book, The Life and Death of Tupac Amaru Shakur.
Right. And reading all this, it completely dismantled what I thought I knew. It really feels like the public image was just a mask for something way, way darker.
It definitely was a mask. But for Tupac, you have to understand it was also a shield. Because what we're looking at today isn't just a standard biography of a rapper.
No, it's way bigger than that.
If you look at the sources, especially the writings from Blaise on Fire and Yasmin Fula, this is actually an investigation into a very specific lineage of revolution, a lineage that ended in two incredibly entangled tragedies.
Two tragedies. Because, and this is the core mission of our deep dive today, we aren't just talking about Tupac Amaru Shakur, we're talking about Yaki Gaddafi.
Right. Yafeu Fula.
Yeah.
Tupac's best friend, his god brother, and arguably the one person who might have completely changed history if he hadn't been killed just 2 months after Tupac.
That is the part that literally kept me up last night. The fact that there was a witness right there.
Okay.
But, okay, before we get to the crime scene in Vegas, I want to go back to the beginning.
We have to. The context is everything.
Because the contradiction of Tupac's life is just staggering. You have this guy who became the ultimate face of gangster rap, but he was raised by the Black Panther Party.
And not just raised by them in some loose ideological sense, he was born into the fire of the movement.
Yeah, let's unpack that. I knew his mom, Afeni Shakur, was a Panther. But I didn't realize the sheer intensity of the Panther 21 trial until I read those excerpts from Blaise on Fire's book.
It's an incredible piece of history. So picture this. It's 1969. The government is cracking down incredibly hard on the Black Panthers in New York. They arrest 21 members, basically the leadership, and slap them with the 156 counts of conspiracy. They are facing hundreds of years in prison.
And Afeni is one of them.
She's one of them. She's sitting in a maximum security cell, and she is pregnant with Tupac.
That alone is terrifying, just the stress of that. But here is the detail that absolutely blew my mind. She didn't have some high-powered defense attorney in the corner. She represented herself.
Yes. That is the key aha moment about Afeni Shakur. She wasn't a lawyer. She was a high school dropout.
Wow.
But she walked into that courtroom heavily pregnant, and she cross-examined undercover police officers herself.
That takes so much guts.
She completely tore their stories apart. And she actually won an acquittal for herself and the other defendants.
It's just wild.
It speaks to her absolute brilliance. But think about what that means for Tupac. He wasn't even born yet, and he was already on trial against the state.
Right.
Afeni viewed him as a child of the world or a child of the people from the moment he took his very first breath. He didn't just have a mother, he had a movement.
And right there with her in that movement was Yasmin Fula.
Exactly. In the documents, Yasmin is described as the backbone of the movement. She was a paralegal, an activist, and Afeni's closest friend.
She was basically an auntie to Tupac.
She was, and her son, Yafeu, who later became Yaki Gaddafi, grew up right alongside Tupac.
They were the Panther Cubs.
That's what they called them. They were raised in this intense atmosphere of government surveillance, social struggle, and deep intellectualism. They weren't just kids playing on the block. They were groomed to be the next generation of a revolution.
Which makes their names so much more interesting. I always thought Tupac Amaru was just, a cool-sounding name. I had no idea it was a history lesson.
Oh, it's a massive political statement. Tupac Amaru II was an 18th century indigenous revolutionary in Peru.
Right.
He led a massive uprising against Spanish colonial rule. He was eventually captured and executed, drawn and quartered, actually.
Oof, that's brutal.
Yeah, it is. So by giving him that name, Afeni was intentionally connecting him to a global history of resistance against empire. And then Shakur is Arabic for thankful.
So you get this indigenous warrior spirit combined with gratitude.
Exactly.
It's heavy. And then When they grew up and formed their rap group, the Outlaws, they kept that exact theme going, didn't they?
They completely doubled down on it. Tupac took the alias Machiavelli after Niccolo Machiavelli.
The political strategist who wrote about faking his death to fool his enemies?
Right, and Fula took the name Yaki Gaddafi after Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan leader who was basically the West's public enemy #1 at the time.
And the other guys in the group were Napoleon, Castro, Mussolini.
Yeah, they were deliberately styling themselves as enemies of the state. It wasn't just, hey, we are tough guys from the street. It was, we are opposition leaders.
That context completely changes how I hear the music now. It wasn't just gangster posturing. It was this weird mix of revolutionary cosplay and very real danger.
But here is where the tragedy really starts to creep in. They had this revolutionary DNA from their parents, but they tried to operate inside a capitalist music industry that, frankly, was designed to eat them alive.
Okay, yeah, this brings us to the money, or I guess the total lack of it. I have to be honest, when I read the transcript of Afeni Shakur's interview with BeatScore, I thought there was a typo.
Oh, about his bank account?
Yes, she said she discovered Tupac had next to zero money when he died.
It stops you right in your tracks, doesn't it?
It really does. But help me understand this, because we've all seen the music videos. You look at the To Live and Die in L.A. video, the gold chains, the Versace shirts, the whole fleet of luxury cars. I mean, you can't fake a Rolls Royce.
Well, you can't fake the actual car, but you can certainly fake the ownership of it. And this is where the whole Death Row Records era gets incredibly dark.
The contract.
Right. The sources detail the contract Tupac signed. Remember the context? He was in prison in New York on sexual assault charges. He was broke, his family was struggling, and he was desperate to get out.
He had no cash for bail.
None. Enter Suge Knight. He flies in, posts the $1.4 million bail, and gets Tupac out. But in exchange, Tupac signs a 3-page handwritten contract.
Handwritten. While sitting in a prison visiting room.
Yes. And it was an absolute deal with the devil. Here is the mechanism that Afeni exposes in that interview. Tupac was generating millions and millions in revenue.
Album sales, concert tickets, those movie roles like Gridlocked and Gang-related.
Exactly. But everything he supposedly had was cross-collateralized against his debt to the label.
So if you wanted a car...
If Tupac wanted a Rolls Royce, he didn't buy it. Death Row Records leased the Rolls Royce and just handed him the keys. The title was entirely in the label's name.
And if you wanted jewelry...
The label bought the jewelry and gave it to him as a gift, but then they charged the cost of it against his future earnings.
So he's basically an indentured servant walking around with really nice accessories.
Accessories that he didn't even own. Afeni explains that when he asked for actual cash to buy a house for his mom or to set up his future, the money just wasn't there.
Wow.
She actually called the industry prostitution and thievery. She said Tupac walked around thinking he was a multimillionaire, setting his family up for generations, but in reality, he was digging a deeper debt hole every single time he walked into the recording studio.
That is just heartbreaking. And speaking of the studio, the files mention the master tapes.
The mother lode. Over 200 unreleased songs. Afeni had to fight a massive legal battle just to find out where they were physically located. We're talking about an asset worth hundreds of millions of dollars that the label was effectively hiding from his estate.
And to make matters worse, look at who was representing him legally during all of this. David Kenner.
This is the part that makes any lawyer cringe. David Kenner was Tupac's lawyer, but David Kenner was also Suge Knight's lawyer.
Oh boy.
And he was the lawyer for Death Row Records.
Okay, for those of you listening who didn't go to law school, break down why that is so incredibly bad.
Well, imagine you are getting a divorce. And you hire a lawyer, but that lawyer is also representing your spouse. And he's also representing the judge. Who is that lawyer actually going to protect? The artist who might leave the label in a year, or the CEO who pays the massive retainer fee?
That's a huge conflict of interest.
It is the literal definition of it. Tupac was trapped. He was the biggest star in the world, but he was financially underwater. He was increasingly paranoid, and the pressure was just building and building.
And that pressure cooker explodes on September 7, 1996, Las Vegas.
The night it all unraveled.
Now, in the stack of files, we have this transcript from Discretion TV featuring a witness named Neckbone. I'd never heard of this guy before, but his description of the night really strips away all the Hollywood glamour of it.
It completely grounds the event in reality. Neckbone was riding in the car directly behind Suge and Tupac's BMW. He talked about how slow everything was moving. It was just a hot, sticky, miserable night in gridlock traffic.
And he says it was like a parade, right?
Exactly. Girls were waving from the sidewalks. People were shouting Tupac's name. So when a white Cadillac rolled up next to them at the intersection of Flamingo and Koval, nobody even flinched. Cars had been pulling up to say hello all night long.
But this one was different.
Neckbone describes seeing an arm come out of the back window. Just an arm. And then the chaos.
He says he thought Suge and Pac were dead instantly because of the sheer volume of fire.
It was a barrage. And for decades, the biggest mystery in music was who was in that white Cadillac.
And thanks to these DEA reports and the recent legal motions regarding Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, we have a pretty clear picture of what the government believes happened. And I want to be super clear for everyone listening right now. These are allegations found in legal filings. Keefe D. is currently fighting these charges in court, and we are not taking sides, just reporting what the documents say.
That is a crucial distinction. We are just looking at the files. But what makes these files so explosive is that they contain a proffer agreement from 2008.
Right, okay, the word proffer. I see this all over the documents. Can you translate that into normal English for us?
Sure. Think of it like a Queen for a Day deal in a mob movie. Keefe D was facing serious drug charges. We're talking life in prison type stuff.
Okay.
The feds told him, look, if you sit down and tell us the absolute truth about the murders of Biggie and Tupac, we won't use that information to prosecute you for those crimes. We just want to close the case.
So he gets a get-out-of-jail-free card, but only if he talks.
Exactly, and Talkie did. In these documents, Keefe D places himself in the front passenger seat of that white Cadillac. He admits to handing the gun to the back seat.
To Orlando Anderson or DeAndre Smith.
Right. But the why in these files is even more shocking than the who.
This is the part that made my jaw drop. The Diddy allegations.
Yeah. This is incredibly heavy. In these interview summaries, Keefe D alleges that Sean Puffy Combs Diddy offered a bounty, $1 million to handle the Knight and Shakur problem because he was afraid of Suge.
$1 million. Again, I have to remind you listening, this is an allegation from a federal report. We are remaining completely impartial here. But it reads like a movie script. And the files also mention a guy named Eric Zip Martin.
Yes. Zip was a major figure in New York at the time. The files allege Zip was the middleman. He allegedly provided the gun a Glock .40, and he was supposed to handle the payment.
Right.
Keefe D claims, and again, this is his claim in the proffer, that after the hit, they reached out to Zip for the money.
But they never got it.
He claims the check never cleared.
It is just wild to see these names, these absolute titans of culture, mixed into federal documents about contract killings.
It really shows how thin the line was between the music business and organized crime in the 90s. But while Keefe D is now sitting in a cell, arguing that his 2008 immunity deal should protect him from these new charges.
There is a massive what if hanging over this whole case that we need to get into.
Yaki Gaddafi.
The eyewitness.
Yes.
This is the part of the story that I feel like gets completely buried. We talked about Neckbone being in the car behind Tupac, but Yaki Gaddafi, Tupac's godbrother, the Panther Cup was in that car too.
He was, and unlike Neckbone, who ducked down when the shooting started, Yaki reportedly saw everything.
We have police reports mentioned in the stack where he indicates he could positively identify the assailant.
Imagine the sheer power of that. The biggest murder case in music history, and you have a witness who is like a brother to the victim, ready to point the finger. He told officers he could pick the shooter out of the lineup.
And 2 months later, he's dead in an apartment hallway in New Jersey.
November 10th, 1996. He was only 19 years old.
Now, the official story, which we see in the source material from Napoleon, another Outlaws member, is that it was a tragic accident.
Right. The narrative goes that Napoleon's cousin, a guy named Roddy, was high and playing with a gun. He thought the safety was on, pointed it at Gaddafi, and pulled the trigger. Just a senseless, stupid mistake.
But Yasmin Fula, Gaddafi's mother, she is not buying that. Not for 1 single second. And reading her breakdown of the evidence, I can completely see why.
When you look at her arguments, it's really hard to just accept the accident theory. She points out the physical evidence. Roddy was small, maybe 5'6", 135 pounds. Yaki Gaddafi was a giant. He was 6'4" pounds, over 200 pounds.
And she mentions he was incredibly paranoid at the time, right?
Extremely. After Tupac died, Yaki was wearing a bulletproof vest almost 204/7. He knew he was a loose end. And yet he gets shot in the one place the vest doesn't cover. Right in the head.
It feels surgical.
Yasmin argues that the angle of the shot and the body mechanics just don't line up with two guys playing around. She believes Roddy would have had to physically struggle to get that angle or catch him completely off guard in a way that implies intent.
We have this Instagram post from her in the documents that is just searing. She calls out Napoleon directly. She accuses him of eating off the carcass of Tupac's legacy or protecting his cousin who killed her son.
It is visceral grief. She calls it a straight-up cover-up. She cites police reports that mention death threats against Gaddafi weeks before the shooting. To her, the timing is impossible to ignore. Tupac is murdered in September. The star witness is murdered in November. Case closed.
It's certainly cleaner that way for everyone involved.
Exactly. Think about the timeline. If Gaddafi testifies in 1997, maybe Keith D goes to jail right then? Maybe the links to New York and the payment allegations all come out in open court.
The entire history of hip-hop changes. Labels might have collapsed. We might never have had the whole Diddy era as we know it today.
But instead, we got silence for 27 years. And that silence allowed the myth to grow, while the truth was just buried under NDAs and fear.
So where does that leave us today? We have Keith D finally facing trial, although he's fighting it tooth and nail. We have Yasmin Fula releasing projects like her Spirit of an Outlaw book and the Killing Fields documentary trying to get justice for her son.
I think we are in a massive moment of reckoning. The cool factor of the 90s gangster era is wearing off, and we are finally left with the receipts. We're realizing that the thug life wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was a literal meat grinder that chewed up these families.
There's a passage from Blaze on Fire's book that really captures this exact feeling. The section is called Lost, Alone, and Afraid.
It's a beautiful, tragic piece of writing. She talks about how Tupac's death felt like hope had died. She compares it to the loss of MLK or Malcolm X for that specific generation. She uses the phrase, lost on your own land.
Lost on your own land. That really resonates.
It does, because for people like Blaze and Yasmin, this wasn't just about a famous rapper getting shot in Vegas. It was about the systematic destruction of potential. You have Afeni and Yasmin who fought the system in the 60s and 70s with the Panthers, watching that same system consume their sons in the 90s.
It's a generational trauma loop.
Precisely. And Yasmin calls herself the caretaker of these memories. That is a heavy burden to carry. She's fighting to ensure that Yaki isn't just a footnote in Tupac's story, but is recognized as a revolutionary in his own right who was taken out because he refused to stay silent.
You know, looking back at all these files, the DEA reports, the predatory contracts, the mother's notes, it feels like we've been looking at the wrong things for a long, long time. We've been looking at the East Coast versus West Coast beef or the gang rivalries.
Those were the distractions. The real story is about exploitation. Financial exploitation by the labels, legal manipulation by the lawyers, and the violent removal of anyone who threatened to expose the game.
It is incredibly sobering. We started this deep dive talking about Tupac the legend, but I feel like we're ending it thinking about Tupac and Yaki the humans. Two young kids who were in way over their heads.
They were. Blaze writes that despite everything, they are legends. And they absolutely are. But we owe it to them to understand the actual price they paid for that legend. It wasn't free. It cost them everything.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with today. We know Yaki Gaddafi saw the shooter in Vegas. We know he was ready to talk to the police. If that gun in New Jersey hadn't gone off, if Yaki had walked into a courtroom in 1997, would we be looking at a completely different cultural landscape today? Not just rewriting hip-hop history, but would an entire web of industry corruption and organized crime have been dismantled 30 years ago?
That is the ultimate what if. And honestly, I think the answer is yes. Everything would be different.
If you want to go down this rabbit hole yourself, and trust me, there is a lot more there than we could cover today. Check out Yasmin Fula's book, Spirit of an Outlaw. Look up the transcripts from Discretion TV and The Art of Dialogue, and definitely read Blaze on Fula's work. The primary sources tell a story the headlines never did.
Stay curious, and always question the narrative.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.